You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. A ceasefire between Israel and Iran appears to be holding at this hour. President Trump spoke briefly to reporters this morning on the White House lawn. He used an expletive and said he was unhappy that the two countries had both initially violated the agreement to pause attacks.
You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
More than a week after Israel kicked off the new war with Iran, Trump intervened on Saturday by ordering a U.S. strike on 3 Iranian nuclear sites. CNN reports the Pentagon's initial intelligence assessment is that the strikes did not destroy the core components of the country's nuclear program. This morning, the president has been reposting messages on social media from supporters calling his handling of the conflict an overwhelming victory and a historic masterclass. A couple hours ago, I caught up with a member of Washington's congressional delegation who's been a big critic of Trump's decision to enter the war. Adam Smith is a House Democrat who represents parts of Bellevue, Seattle, all the way to Auburn and Federal Way. He's the ranking member on the House Armed Services Committee. And I'll note that we talked in the 9 a.m. Pacific hour this morning because, as always, this story is evolving from minute to minute. And he's also my former boss. I worked for Congressman Smith in his office back in 2011. Welcome to the program, Congressman Adam Smith, Democrat and ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee. Hey, Adam, thanks for being here again.
Right. Okay. Always good to be on. It's good to see you, Larry.
Yeah, good to see you, too. So we have ceasefire now between Israel and Iran. Trump and his supporters say this was a limited action, big success, pushed back the nuclear program. Win for Trump right now? What's your assessment?
I think it's kind of neutral. I mean, certainly President Trump will always claim a win, regardless of the facts. They are famous for trying to create the reality that they live in. But, basically he's taking credit for stopping a war that he started. I know that the arsonist analogy has been overused here recently. You set a house on fire and then you put it out. Does that really help? First of all. Second of all, there's not a lot of evidence yet as to how long the ceasefire is going to hold. It didn't hold in the first place. And this is between Israel and Iran. I mean, keep in mind, Israel, the war in Gaza is still going. Israel is still bombing in Syria. They're still bombing in Lebanon. It's not like peace has broken out in the Middle East. And then the second big part of this is Iran's nuclear program is wounded but intact. And we don't have any realistic estimate as to what the change has been from our attack or even from Israel's attack. Prior to the start of the war, this war, Israel attacking Iran directly, Iran was estimated to have enough 60% plus enriched uranium so that in a matter of days, they could make enough uranium for probably 10 to 12 bombs. They were also estimated to have roughly 19,000 centrifuges. How much 60% enriched uranium do they have now? How many centrifuges do they have now? Nobody has an answer to that question. But I can tell you most of the experts, or all of the experts that I talk to say their program has not been eliminated, which means that we're still going to have to negotiate an outcome here. We're still going to have to get back to a JCPOA-like world where Iran agrees to not move forward with their nuclear weapon. This was the criticism of military action for better than a decade, that it would not be enough to stop their nuclear program. So Trump pulled us out of the JCPOA, which Iran was abiding by. Iran was not pursuing a nuclear weapon. The second Trump pulled us out of that agreement, they went back to pursuing a nuclear weapon. And now he's bombed them to try to slow down the program that he forced into being restarted. So it's not really something to celebrate in that sense. And also, we don't have the deal yet. There is no, long-term peace achieved between Iran and Israel, and we do not have any confidence that Iran has abandoned their nuclear weapons program. So we're not in that much of a different place than we were before Trump's decision to bomb. And I think, bombing a sovereign nation is something that most countries don't like. So I think it undermines U.S. credibility to make the decision to bomb, and it's far from clear as to exactly what was achieved by that bombing campaign over the weekend.
Which direction does this go now? I do want to get in just a second, because you introduced a war powers resolution last night with some of your colleagues in the House. I want to get to that in just a second, and the conversation about the president's powers for what he, the operation that he conducted here. But first, what is your assessment of where this goes from here? Because there is an argument that says this forces the regime in Iran to the table because they're legitimately concerned that this would be escalated to regime change. Or we say, this goes towards, they rush towards a nuclear weapon and it becomes North Korea. I mean, which direction do you think it goes?
Couple things about it. First of all, the direction it goes right now is basically where it was even, before the U.S. bombed Iran, and that is we go back to trying to negotiate a deal. I mean, we're right back to where we were before that bombing campaign started. And to the extent that Iran is forced to the table, they were not forced to the table by one bombing campaign by the U.S. They were forced to the table by what Israel did. I mean, Israel has severely weakened Hamas, severely weakened Hezbollah. Well, part of it is what Israel did. And then also Assad was driven from power. Israel didn't have much to do with that. So Iran is in a weaker position that doesn't really have much to do with the few bombs that we dropped in the one raid that we did. So does that force Iran to be more willing to make a deal? Maybe, maybe not. But again, not impacted in any real way by our decision to bomb them. So we go forward and we see if they're going to negotiate that. But then the larger and the more important question here is, or it's not just about Iran and Israel. It's Syria, it's Lebanon, it's Gaza, because Iran has used these proxies. It's Yemen and the Houthis to some extent. So do we get to a place where we have a stable Syria, a stable Lebanon, some sort of future for the Palestinian people, or not? Over the decades, Israel has proven to be quite adept at fighting back and breaking things in the Arab world. What they haven't proven to be particularly good at is creating the conditions for something more reasonable to rise up in its place. They knocked the PLO out of Lebanon 40 years ago. That was successful, but then they stumbled into a decade-plus war in Lebanon that gave birth to Hezbollah and a dramatically destabilized Lebanon that made Israel less safe. The same could be happening right now in Gaza and the West Bank. So where we go from here is the most important part. And we're still in the position of having to negotiate some type of settlement. And we'll see. I don't think we're in a dramatically different position than we were before we started, before we did the one bombing campaign in Iran.
So what is the War Powers resolution that you and your colleagues introduced last night? What are your goals here? What are the outlines of it?
Yeah, the goal is simple, to basically say, President Trump, you cannot go to war with Iran without congressional approval. That is the straightforward goal. Now, there's all kinds of nuances here, and we've got a couple hundred years worth of history. And then even since the War Powers Resolution was put into place 50-ish years ago, presidents have weaseled their way around it in a dozen different ways, in a bipartisan way.
Yeah, Democrats too. I mean, Obama bombed Libya, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. Clinton, bombed Serbia around Kosovo without congressional approval. What we're trying to prevent here is the U.S. going to war with Iran without congressional approval. Now, the War Powers Resolution is a really interesting thing, because what it says is if the president takes military action, he has to notify Congress within 2 days. And then if the hostilities continue past 60 days, he can't do that without congressional approval. But there's all kinds of ways to weasel around that. So we bombed Iran, okay? But now we've stopped. Does that restart the clock? If we want to bomb them again in a week, does that count as we're 10 days into it now? Or is it, does the clock restart? And then the Obama administration did one of the, most semantic things I've ever seen a president do. When we attacked Libya, they gave us the War Powers notification. And when we hit the 60-day point, they said hostilities are done. And we were still lobbing tomahawks into Libya. It's just kind of a little cleanup operation. It's not hostilities. So they got into that semantic game to be able to continue their operation in Libya, even without congressional approval. So the resolution that I'm introducing with many other Democratic colleagues is to say on Iran, we're going to be 100% clear. You cannot attack Iran without congressional approval.
What's the significance of authorization? I mean, because you go back to Iraq and there was authorization for that, no end game. Like, is there something about congressional authorization and the need to go and debate this at least in the legislative branch? Like, does it change anything? And would Congress today be more likely to exert any kind of oversight than it was 20 years ago?
To your first question, the answer is yes, but. Yes, I think it makes a difference. It makes a difference because it means that we have a more democratic approach to this decision. You get more voices and you are less likely to have a rash, catastrophic decision made by one person. It's the basic belief in representative democracy. President's one person. Yes, he or hopefully someday she was elected. But Congress is 535 people, much more directly representative of the American people. So if we really want to reflect what the American people want, Congress should at least be included in that conversation because theoretically it will get us to a better decision. Not a rash decision made based on one person's whims, but based on a more democratic process. And there is absolutely value in that. It can help prevent us from stumbling into a conflict. Now, Congress is perfectly capable of, making mistakes on that front as well. We passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. We passed the Iraq resolution, and approved it. And you could argue about certainly the wisdom of that, but you at least have a process that prevents that one person from making that decision. Now, it's also problematic because military decisions tend to be quick in their nature, somewhat urgent depending on the circumstances. But we have provisions in the Constitution for that. If the U.S. is under attack, the president has Article 2 self-defense rights that doesn't require congressional approval. It's baked in. It's protected. Even the War Powers Resolution allows the president to take military action without congressional approval for some period of time. The question is, should Congress have a say at any point? I think the answer to that question should be yes. It shouldn't be totally turned over to the president to do what he wants for as long as he wants in terms of using the military.
There has been this splintering of the MAGA coalition, much talked about over the past week or so. A lot of people saw the Ted Cruz, Tucker Carlson interview over Trump's evolution from Trump the Dove to now bombing Iran. Thomas Massie of Kentucky is now the president's target. He's the only member of Congress who's really vociferously opposed Trump bombing without authorization from Congress. And he's going to get primaried. Trump's going to fund a PAC against him. Like, are there any congressional Republicans at this point who are interested in reining this in? Or, is this a situation where there's no cracks besides Massie on the right?
There are really no cracks. You have some people, Don Bacon has been sharply critical of the president's policies in Ukraine and on Medicaid and a couple of other things. But the cult remains firmly in place. Donald Trump says jump, they say how high. And then if he says the exact opposite thing the next day, they do that too. So we definitely, more so than at any point in my lifetime, have a leader of a party who it's about him, it's about what he wants. And he says it, they do it. It's a huge problem and is really undermining our democracy. Also, I happen to think President Trump is uniquely unqualified to play the role of cult leader, that he makes many bad decisions. He makes those decisions, spontaneously, rashly, and based on what is going to serve his personal ego as much as any sort of policy goal. But we shouldn't have any one person with that measure of power. But as of this moment, yeah, the Republican Party's still doing what he says and when he says it. Now, there's cracks here, all right? People don't like the tariffs, and the tariffs are just beginning to have an impact. They're negatively impacting our economy. People don't like the Medicaid cuts. What he's doing with the reconciliation bill, as they're trying to jam that through, is also going to have a negative problem. People don't like his approach to immigration. They like securing the border. They do not like having a Gestapo-like police state snatch people off the street randomly and deport them to El Salvador or Djibouti or Libya or wherever they're going to send them. That sort of tyrannical approach is not what even many of the MAGA people signed up for. So whatever cracks there may be between Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz, I think that by and large, his cult is still in place. We have to continue to weaken it by showing how it's impacting the American people. I think there is also an opportunity. The fourth area, in addition to tariffs, Medicaid, and immigration, is he's getting us involved in wars, and he said he wasn't going to do it. He said he was going to negotiate, cut deals, but the war in Ukraine is going stronger than it's ever gone. Putin is attacking more aggressively. We had a ceasefire in Gaza when Trump came into office. Now we've got a war in Gaza. Then we had a war between Israel and Iran that we didn't have before Trump came into power. So his vaunted claimed ability as a deal maker is not panning out, and he is involving our military in a conflict in the Middle East that at the moment is growing. Okay, we've had a ceasefire now for maybe the last 2 hours. We'll see where that goes. But thus far, he is not living up to his promise that he was going to negotiate an end to all of these wars.
Do you think Democrats offer a real alternative right now? And I know a lot of voters don't care too much about policy overseas, although the anti-war sentiment in the MAGA coalition is a big factor. Do you think that there's a scenario where a Kamala Harris in the White House would have seen Israel Netanyahu beginning the campaign against Iran and stood on the sidelines and not used bunker busters? Would a Democrat have done something different?
Yeah, no, I think a Democrat would have done something different. Now, I think we are deeply conflicted as a party. We have not figured out what we want our national security and foreign policy to be. And I think we're conflicted within our coalition. There is, a group of people who really want the U.S. to be isolationist. I mean, there's a group of people who think that the U.S. is not a positive actor in the world. And we see that over and over again. I disagree with that. I see what Russia and China and Iran and North Korea and terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, Hezbollah and Hamas are doing. I think that is a threat to our interests and a threat to our security, and we need to figure out how to deal with it. I don't think it's a matter of if we just pulled back, everything would be fine. But I also agree that we have relied way too much on the military. And that's another part of this. Trump has gutted foreign aid. He has dramatically reduced our diplomatic capability. Well, look, if we want to become less militant and less reliant on the military, which I agree with, I think the military is a blunt instrument that is problematic in many ways, number one. And number two, we have pure competitors now. This is not 1991 anymore. China and Russia are up and being competitive. They've got help from Iran and North Korea. We're not in a position, even if it was ever wise to do so, and I don't think it was, we are not in a position to simply bully our way through the world because of how much stronger we are than everybody. We need a different plan. I just don't think that plan should be based on the premise that the U.S. is the bad actor in the world. I think it should be based on the premise that we need to come up with a more intelligent, more broad-based way to have a positive influence on the world to deal with the very real threats that, again, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and various terrorist actors present. And we're conflicted. I have these conversations with a lot of different groups, and a lot of people are angry. Very few people think that the Democrats are where they need to be, but they're split in what that anger is. Some think that we're too weak and we're not aggressiveness. Some think that we're too aggressive. So we have to try to figure that out to present a more reasonable alternative, certainly by 2028.
You mentioned that what Israel had been doing, weakening the proxies, has, really gotten us to where we're at right now. Israel starting the, bombing campaign about, a week, 10 days ago. I'm curious if you think the U.S. had a real choice here, because it seems to me that Netanyahu started this stage of the war, started a bombing campaign, and said it can't end without bunker busters. We need the bunker busters, and kind of backed the U.S. into this situation where Trump, in order to be a strong ally to Israel, felt that, this was necessary. Do you think Netanyahu basically backed Trump into this? Did he have a choice?
No, he did. But I think there was absolutely a choice. And the other part of this is the choice was to say, we're not going to do that, because I still believe that the U.S. taking an active role in the war was a huge risk and has hurt us in some ways. It is a different thing if Israel is fighting with Iran. Iran has a clear existential threat to Israel. Anyone who disagrees with that has not been paying attention. Iran has made it very clear they don't think Israel should exist, and they've been working very very assiduously in a bunch of different ways, supporting Hezbollah, supporting Hamas, doing all of that. So,
but there's a
that's
difference here. Sorry, Congressman, I just want to say that there's a difference here between the existential threat, big picture, and then was it an immediate threat right now, right, with a severely weakened Iran? Like there's just a distinction there, yeah.
that sort of walks us down to what was Israel's proper role here. But Iran had enriched uranium to 60%, which meant they were days away from being able to build a bomb, build about 10 of them by most estimates.
But the
Yeah,
U.S.,
days.
the U.S. assessment was not that they were days away, was that they were not weaponizing, according to Tulsi
No,
Gabbard.
no, no. Actually, the U.S. assessment was that Iran had not decided to build a bomb. And I think that was correct. That was correct. However, if they changed their mind, it would be mere days before they had enough uranium to build about 10 bombs. That was the actual assessment. So they were really close that if they changed their mind, you would have had maybe a week or two to stop them at that point. But we walked down a different road. The road that I was talking about was, what does it mean that the U.S. actually bombed Iran? It means that we have inserted ourselves in the war, and there was risk, and there is still risk that Iran and their proxies will strike back, will take that as an attack. I mean, remember, when we killed Soleimani, they lobbed a bunch of missiles at El Asad Air Base, and then everyone said it was done, but they kept firing drones until they killed 3 Americans in Jordan at Tower 22. So we have inserted ourselves in a way that has placed Americans at greater risk, and please don't think that that risk has gone away. That's number one. Number two, which nobody is talking about, China and Russia are in this with Iran. So is North Korea at this point. And now that we have decided to dive into this, and China, Russia, North Korea see us an adversary, they are going to help Iran more than they otherwise would have, which means Iran is going to be much easier for them to rearm and re-equip. Those two consequences of us dropping those bombs should not be dismissed. And then back to, what did we accomplish by dropping those bombs? Did we end Iran's nuclear program? No, we did not. And I don't think anyone can dispute that. How far did we push it back? Weeks, months, a year? I mean, that's debatable, but it's not debatable that we still have to go in and negotiate a settlement. So I still don't think this was a smart decision for all of those reasons.
Really quickly, this is a bit of a turn, but I saw you commenting on the ruling from the Supreme Court that's going to allow the Trump administration to deport people to third countries, including really dangerous places, at least until this case works its way. It's likely going to be back in the Supreme Court. We touched on immigration earlier, and what you feel is that the public's displeasure with the way the Trump administration is pursuing deportations. Just, before we go, this case involved at least one person who was in detention in Tacoma.
Yeah.
What's your take on what the court has done here and the implications for the Trump administration's ability to send people to South Sudan and all sorts of different places?
It's appalling. I mean, it's appalling that the U.S. is allowing people to be snatched off the streets like this and sent to countries that they have no connection to and without any due process. But my overall take on immigration is, I think we are in a position now to counterpunch in immigration on a way that we weren't before from a political standpoint. But Democrats got to get smarter on immigration. It is the legitimate concern of the American people. Do Democrats believe in having a secure border? We had major problems at the border with the number of people coming across. And the country is worried about it. I'm worried about that. So completely unlimited immigration, unlimited asylum with very little enforcement is not a plausible path forward. But what we have to punch back on is, okay, people are worried about Democrats on that. But the people don't want, people being deported who are not a threat. People who, okay, maybe they're here undocumented, but they've been working in the country for decades. They're paying taxes, raising their family, part of our community, not committing any crimes. And now we've got masked people rounding them up and snatching them off the streets. And also, by the way, not just the undocumented. They pick people up by mistake because, again, that's the point of due process. All right, is to make sure you're picking up the right person. The Trump administration says, well, that person doesn't deserve due process. They're part of a gang. They're blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, but the due process is what proves that they're actually part of the gang. And without the due process, we're all vulnerable to it. So if the Democrats came up with an immigration policy, said, yeah, we're going to enforce the border. We're not going to allow everyone to come in, but we are going to have a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants who are vital parts of our community. And we're going to open up more immigration so that people can get in the legal way. And so, because Trump is restricting that too. All right. He's making it harder to get in legally, even as he's trying to secure the border. So I think we've got a lane here if we go down the road that I just described. Let's support immigration. Let's support a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented population. But let's also be in favor of enforcing immigration laws and having a secure border. I think that's a good message that Trump has given us an opening on right now.
Congressman Adam Smith, always an honor to have you on the show, sir, and good to see you. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
You as well. Thanks, Libby.
And we will continue coverage of the situation in the Middle East all day on KUOW as things develop. Tomorrow, Republican Representative Michael Baumgartner will join us on air to discuss his support of Trump's strikes in Iran and his party's response to the conflict. Do you have a question for Representative Baumgartner? We haven't had a Republican congressman on Soundside since President Trump was elected, if not before that. We've been reaching out for some time, and we just finally were able to connect and get this scheduled. So if you have any questions for Michael Baumgartner or what's happening in Iran and Israel, send them our way. Email soundside@kuow.org or leave us a voicemail at 206-221-3213. That's 206-221-3213. Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at kuow.org.